You may have heard about the Quran's idea of paradise being 72 virgins, and I promise I will come back to those virgins. But in fact, here in the Northwest, we're living very close to the real Quranic idea of paradise, defined 36 times as gardens watered by running streams. Since I live in a houseboat on the running stream of Lake Union, this makes perfect sense to me. But the thing is, how come it's news to most people? I know many well-intentioned non-Muslims who've begun reading the Quran but given up, disconcerted by its otherness. The historian Thomas Carlyle considered Muhammad one of the world's greatest heroes, yet even he called the Quran as toilsome reading as I ever undertook, a wearisome, confused jumble. Part of the problem, I think, is that we imagine that the Quran can be read as we usually read a book, as though we can curl up with it on a rainy afternoon with a bowl of popcorn within reach, as though God, and the Quran is entirely in the voice of God speaking to Muhammad, were just another author on the bestseller list. Yet the fact that so few people do actually read the Quran is precisely why it's so easy to quote. That is, to misquote. Phrases and snippets taken out of context in what I call the highlighter version, which is the one favored by both Muslim fundamentalists and anti-Muslim Islamophobes. So this past spring, as I was gearing up to begin writing a biography of Muhammad, I realized I needed to read the Quran properly as I could, that is. My Arabic's reduced by now to wielding a dictionary, so I took 4 well-known translations and decided to read them side by side, verse by verse, along with a transliteration and the original 7th century Arabic. Now, I did have an advantage. My last book was about the story behind the Shia-Sunni split, and for that I'd worked closely with the earliest Islamic histories, so I knew the events to which the Quran constantly refers, its frame of reference. I knew enough, that is, to know that I'd be a tourist in the Quran, an informed one, an experienced one even, but still an outsider, an agnostic Jew reading someone else's holy book. So I read slowly. I'd set aside 3 weeks for this project, and that, I think, is what is meant by hubris, because it turned out to be 3 months. I did resist the temptation to skip to the back where the shorter and more clearly mystical chapters are, but every time I thought I was beginning to get a handle on the Quran, that feeling of, I get it now, it'd slip away overnight, and I'd come back in the morning wondering if I wasn't lost in a strange land. And yet the terrain was very familiar. The Quran declares that it comes to renew the message of the Torah and the Gospels, so 1/3 of it reprises the stories of biblical figures like Abraham, Moses, Joseph, Mary, Jesus. God himself was utterly familiar from his earlier manifestation as Yahweh, jealously insisting on no other gods. The presence of camels, mountains, desert wells and springs took me back to the year I spent wandering the Sinai desert. And then there was the language, the rhythmic cadence of it, reminding me of evenings spent listening to Bedouin elders recite hours-long narrative poems entirely from memory. And I began to grasp why it said that the Quran is really the Quran, only in Arabic. Take the Fatiha, the 7-verse opening chapter that is the Lord's Prayer and the Shema Israel of Islam combined. It's just 20